For implementing a lean system, it's only a meaningful question if it's fit in the context of what's the lean system we're trying to build.
If you've been following the lean movement over the last few years, you've likely heard the phrase, yes, the tools of lean are important, but in the end, it's all about people. Heck, if you've listened to this podcast, you've likely heard me and past guests say this exact phrase many, many times. And while there aren't likely many people who would disagree that the people side of things is important, my guest today argues that using language such as "it's all about people" may in fact need to be challenged. His name is Jon Miller, and regular listeners to the podcast likely know that Jon is one of my business partners here at Gemba Academy. And as I've mentioned before, Jon has likely forgotten more about lean than I'll ever know. And while I'm definitely biased because he's such a good friend, I stand by the statement that I believe Jon is one of the brightest lean thinkers walking the earth today. Now, on today's show, Jon and I dig into the question, is lean really all about people? And if it's not, what is lean all about? Now, Jon also shares some really cool insight into his early days as a translator for some Taiichi Ohno trained consultants. Now, show notes for this episode, which will include links to everything Jon and I discuss, can be found over at gembapodcast.com. Just look for episode 207. You can also check out Gemba Academy's lean learning system over at gembaacademy.com with a fully functional trial. Now, let's get to the show. All right, Jon, well, welcome back to the show. How's it going?
Going well, Ron. Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah. So, Jon, just in case folks don't know who you are, or don't know about your background, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are, how you first came to learn about all this continuous improvement stuff, and then obviously what you're up to these days.
Sure. I'll keep it brief. 25 years ago now, hard to believe, 1993, I after university, I got into working with Japanese consultants as an interpreter, translator, and traveled all around the U.S., all around the world, basically repeating back and forth what they were, what these commonly called the Shingijutsu company consultants, but there were a couple other groups as well, students of Taiichi Ohno and ex-Toyota guys who were out there teaching this stuff. I was in the thick of that, which taught me a lot. And you knew
Japanese because you grew up in Japan, right?
Born in Japan. Parents lived there as working with the church and so forth. So I did that for 5-6 years, and then liked it enough and was interested enough, intrigued enough that I started a consulting company called Gemba Research, which took about was in that role for about 13 years, and then that organization joined with Kaizen Institute, which is kind of the granddaddy of the lean consultancies. They've been around 30 plus years, and Masaki Mai, the author of Kaizen, founded it and all those things, and served in a leadership role with that company for 4 years, and then kind of looked around and realized that my kids were growing up and I was on the road all the time and decided I needed to take a break. So 3 years ago, I guess, I took myself off the road, off the market in a way, and refocused efforts on working here with Gemba Academy. So Gemba Academy, to go back a few years, Ron, Hugh, and Kevin and I co-founded Gemba Academy in 2009. And this has allowed me to not travel nearly as much, so stay connected with the family and community, and yet contribute to the lean community, the lean world in a way. So yeah, that is what I'm doing these days.
And you also got really good at making like rhubarb pies, I understand, and stuff like that, right? You know, in all your spare time.
Rhubarb pies. I don't know about that. Did I make a rhubarb pie for you?
Well, you did. I remember I was visiting you and you were bragging about how you were growing your own rhubarb and you were making pies or something like that. So.
You think it's not somebody else. I do like gardening, and I did go through a phase where I was baking stuff, but I can't link to that, but anyways.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, so a few weeks ago, you started a blog series, and you had a pretty controversial topic. Name or title of the article really caught my attention when it came through my email for the first time. It says, "Lean is all about the people, or is it?" I'm exaggerating, or is it? And it was a 2-part series, and we'll link to that in the show notes for everyone so they can go actually read the article. So gembapodcast.com, and this will be episode 207. So go check it out. But let's talk about it. So, Jon, we often say, I've said it probably a million times on this podcast, that lean's all about the people, and you really, if you don't get the people side right, nothing else is going to matter. So what's your take on that? Is lean all about the people?
Yeah, well, I think this is really an interesting question, because I think it's one of those things that once you hear it, you agree with it, go, yeah, that makes sense. I agree with it, but you never question it. And I think the more we question the things that we agree with strongly and take for granted, the better chance we have of gaining deeper insight into them. So if I agree strongly with it, why so? And is this just an emotional reaction, or is there some logic behind it? Am I right or am I wrong? So if you oppose something, it's the same thing, right? If you're strongly against something, it's easier to see it clearly in the light of day. When you agree with something, it isn't always easy to look at it and question it. And like if you have strong faith in whatever, something that you believe in, your country, your family, your values, your religion, and so forth. And it's not always, you don't always want to shake your belief. But in the case of something practical, like how do we be successful? How can we be successful with lean? The people side is important. It's very important. Absolutely. It may even be the most important, but is it? I think that's the question. Let's challenge that. And so is it?
Yeah. Well, so if it's not, let's just maybe start it that way. What are some other characteristics of what we call lean that might be, as important, if not more important, than the people side of things?
Yeah, so I think it's valuable to kind of start with saying that when we say something is all about people or all about something, if you say I'm all about that, it doesn't mean that I do nothing but focus on that, or that's the 100% key to success. This recipe is all about rhubarb. There's no sugar, there's no egg. It's all about the rhubarb. No, rhubarb is the most important ingredient, you can say, because without it isn't rhubarb pie, for example. It just becomes this goo, a sweet goo. It doesn't have the rhubarb, it doesn't have the tanginess to it. So I think if you say it's the main ingredient, it's the characteristic that makes it unique, though it's important to use our words carefully, because otherwise we don't communicate, and if we don't communicate, we don't inspire people to act in the right way. So what are the ingredients? I think people, it's a socio-technical system, right? Lean is a socio-technical system. It involves people, and it involves understanding of scientific mechanisms of how things work, how work works, how supply and demand, how supply chains, how all these things work. It's not a feel-good sort of a fuzzy-wuzzy belief-based magical thing. It's quite scientific, but at the same time, there's a lot about it that is hard to reduce to science, partly because we don't understand humanity thoroughly scientifically, and people also don't like to reduce humanity to reductionism has its limits. So what are the other elements of it? Well, I get into that in the article, and I think it's 3 things. So if you could lean down to kind of 3 critical aspects, then it's the people. It's what we call flow, which is really everything connected to enabling us to transform our time and energy into something of greater value. So it's in that, there's lots and lots of lean methods linked to that. And it ultimately gets into reducing batch sizes and queues and speeding up the flow, making it smooth. And then the third element is the ability to detect and manage abnormalities, which we often call visual management, because that's how we do it. You have eyes that are more sensitive than our other senses, but you can call it visibility, you can call it something else, but it's essentially those 3 things. And you could argue that, you could say, well, what about this or that? But you could put basically all the lean methods, tools, Six Sigma, all those things underneath one of those 3 legs or pillars or brackets or whatever. And some of them are obviously, like Kanban is about flow, but it's also about making abnormalities visible. And of course, it also triggers continuous improvement because the goal of Kanban is to reduce Kanban. So then you have to get into the thinking part of it, the human part of it. So it's not like one thing is only ever in one of those categories, but it's a interaction of those three things. You need all three. So if you were to say lean's all about the people, that's the most important. And when you say something's the most important, you put the most priority on it. It's almost saying, well, I can, to some degree, put fewer resources in the other two, or even neglect it to a degree. If I have to choose one of those things, rather than work on flow, I'm going to work on people. Well, that may not be the correct answer. Depending on the situation that you're in, focusing all on the people and getting their engagement and buy-in may not get you what you need if your company is dying because of a critical lack of flow. You may have to say, you know what, we're going to have to be a little bit more directive and a little bit harsher about these things, and maybe hurt a few people's feelings, not because that's not the intent, but as a consequence, we're going to have to just transform things a little bit more abruptly here, because otherwise we're going to, and I'm not talking about, be rude to people on a day-to-day basis, but if you look at it and say, let's spend 6 months doing change management and communication versus, okay, well, we need that you can't have zero of any of those three areas, but we need to actually cut our batches down, get it on the correct side of the U curve, that is the economic order quantity. At what point do you reduce batches and then stop reducing them because your transaction costs go back up? You have to find that position. And so if you say it's all about people and we'll figure it out, versus going after the science and saying, well, it's actually all about getting to this point, so we need to cut the batch size in half, or cut the inventory in half, like the Taichi Ono style or Shingijutsu style people would say, like, well, no, I'm not going to teach you the logic, I'm not going to help you understand, I'm going to cut it in half. Then you're going to struggle and realize, wow, okay, this is hard, or it's easy, or this was doable, which is also a teaching moment, but it's not putting people in education first. It's putting the drastic change in the queue first.
Yeah. Hey, John. So back when you were young man translating for these old, former Toyota guys or Taichi Uno disciples, like, what was their approach as it relates to what we're talking about here? If there's a stool with three legs on it, people being one, flow and visual management, how well did they do at recognizing that stool with three legs?
Yeah, if they saw somebody on a stool, their approach was to kick the legs out from under you and get you onto the gemba. But that's a different topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for most of the people that I learned from and interacted with from Japan, they were not nearly as aware or self-aware or reflective of what they were teaching. They've been taught in a very sort of a physical way, if you will, where it's like, do this, and you do it and you get it, versus understanding the theory and so forth. So for them there wasn't a lot of abstraction that had gone on. There were a few people that had studied it or had come at it later in their career after they'd been executives, but most of them came at it very bottom up, shop floor, or shop floor frontline manager, or production manager, plant manager. So some level of management, but not a lot in terms of management theory or supply chain theory or any of this science element of it. So they understood the math, basic math for most of Lean. They understood. They were often engineers, so they weren't by any means uneducated or not smart about it, but they hadn't abstracted it and said, here's why it's important and here's how the different things interact. And so some of it was just
they'd seen it so much, that it worked. It was
hard for them to remove themselves from the water and say, okay, that's fish in water. You don't recognize the water around you. That sort of a thing, where people who observed it couldn't describe water as in quite the same way, but they could as an outside observer. So it's an interesting question. But I think a lot of times, the better teachers really understood the importance of both being, so I suppose, tough teachers, where they had a limited amount of time. Literally, they had 5 days in many cases, Kaizen events. So you had to show up on a Sunday, get to know the people through dinner and golf, and then Monday morning start kicking butt, and then Friday try to end on a good note, and then you're off to the next client. And you might come back to that same company after a few weeks or a few months. So there was a lot that had to go on in terms of having impact in a short time and yet not losing the people. And a lot of them did lose the people, some of the time or much of the time. But
why? Because they were too hardcore, or what?
yeah, that's a good question. Probably a topic for another time to get into more deeply. I've often thought about it. Is it that they didn't recognize? Is it that they were intimidated because here they are in America, which America was it was the champion that they were chasing all those years as they were growing up in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and now they've caught up, and now they're coming to America and sort of standing up to the giant and saying, here's what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the giant's sort of standing at them and going, well, no, I don't believe you. So, and then you don't understand what the American is saying in English, or very little of it. And they don't understand what's going on a lot of the time, except what the interpreter filters through to them. And sometimes that interpretation isn't crystal clear.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to sort of bark back and say, no, just do what I say. I don't have time to listen to you because I'm only getting 70% of what you're saying. And even if I got that, it's off topic. So just shut up and do what I say.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of that went on.
Yeah.
And then there was a lot of sort of monkey see, monkey do, where when you see the previous Japanese consultant do that as a younger person coming in, you might say, well, I guess that's the style I need to follow. Mm-hmm. Some of them didn't. Some of them spoke more English and had worked in North America and were more thoughtful. And as I was getting out of that interpreting work, I saw more people who were of a different kind of a breed, if you will, and they, I think, were more popular in the sense that they were more sensitive to the people aspect, or just had better people skills, I think.
Yeah, so
maybe didn't have as much fear.
So Ono was obviously like their one of their main teachers, right? Back in the day. Toyota today, or let's say when the Toyota Way was kind of published, and they came up with some of their principles and whatnot that we've all grabbed onto: respect for people, continuous improvement, all the rest of it. Respect for people is a very important part of the way Toyota operates today. But was it back then with Mr. Ono and those guys? Do you think, like if Mr. Ono were to hold the Toyota Way in his hand, what do you think he would have thought?
So two different questions, I guess. Was it an important point? I think it's always been. So there's a couple different levels we can answer this. The traditional Japanese corporation or company is an extension of Japanese society. And Japanese society is very group oriented. It's an island nation. Don't have immigration. Everybody, you have a very historically and traditionally connected group of people. They're a tribe. So you continue that tradition when you join a company. That you're serving that company as part of your duty to serve as a member of society. Mm-hmm. Where in America, it's much more about the individual. You can move from coast to coast and change company to company, and it's all about you and your family and your faction and maybe even your race and your religion to some degree, where you don't have that level of diversity and variety in Japan. So when you join the company takes care of you, and until maybe the 90s, you work there until you retire. You work there 30, 40 years, and so you did invest in people because they were going to be around for a while. Mm-hmm. And you taught them everything about the company, and you came out of college or high school without much in terms of skill, and we teach you everything you need to know. Where in North America, Europe, you come out of an apprentice system, or you come out of university with a degree or skills that are immediately employed in that. They expect you to come out knowing how to do your job versus the opposite. In Japan, they often teach you your job, and they expect you to have certain educational background or family background, or have gone through certain rites of passage, being on certain clubs, certain groups of certain elite groups of schools or sports or what have you. So there's that. There's sort of a base level of difference in what it means to treat people. I won't use the word respect because that's culturally sort of specific, but how to treat people within a company context. That's one of it. That's one part of it. Mm-hmm. I think the second part of it, which again is maybe a topic for another time, but the religious background of the Toyota family, the type of Buddhists that they were, I think they were maybe more intentionally I guess, concerned with respect for people and respect for, and if you look at the Toyota precepts, it's respect not only for people, but respect for the spiritual nature of existence. Respect for the gods, it says, and by the gods, it's an animist country and lots of Buddhas and so forth. So your ancestors and many of these things. So that's very clear in the Toyota precepts, of sort of the founding values of the company.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that filtered through to how respect for humanity became, one of the parts of Toyota Way. Going back into what does it mean for Taiichi Ohno, what would he say today? I mean, he wasn't a big fan of having things written down and working from a manual, so who knows what he would have thought of that. But yeah, content-wise, I'm sure he wouldn't have had any issue with it. He was always, very respectful of the people on the shop floor. He was tough on engineers and managers who weren't as open-minded or didn't go to the shop floor and get their hands dirty. So
mm-hmm.
that was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's consistent.
Yeah. Before we started recording, we were kind of just chatting a little bit, and I was thinking about my own journey with continuous improvement, and I was thinking about those three legs of the stool, right? And I think in the beginning, at least for me, and I don't know, I don't want to speculate about our listeners, but I'm guessing there's a fair few folks out there who are similar to me in that we really learned about the tools, over Six Sigma, Lean. I've met this guy named Jon Miller, and he taught me how about value stream mapping, and that changed, my world and all the rest of it, right? So it was tools, and honestly, I did a lot of good with it. I mean, I made a lot of things better. I learned a lot myself, but then I did hit a sort of a professional plateau, if you will, and hasn't been really, I guess it was my time here again, the Academy, when we're really running a company and we have employees and all the rest of it, where the importance of people really smacked me in the face, if you will. Like you can't do this all on your own, Ron. You got to get other folks involved. And so that I guess the people leg of my stool began to grow, and maybe the visual management or, identifying abnormalities, maybe that was always there as well. But the people part of the stool wasn't there. So I don't know. I'm curious my speculation is I'm wondering when people say, well, what's next for Lean, in the next 10 years? Like, I wonder if the folks that obviously you can't master any of it and will never master any of it, but let's say people get proficient and at balancing, balancing the people side of Lean with maybe some of the more technical sides of Lean, and they're doing a fair job of it. But I'm wondering if eventually we're going to have to go back to the tools, like maybe at a deeper level than we ever have. Like, hey, Junka, everyone's read about it, but not many people outside of Toyota and Danaher probably practice it, right? So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, John. Like, do you think that I don't know, like the next 10 years, people, if they do understand the people side of things, like where things will go?
Yeah, well, I think you're talking about mastery there, which is learning something and then recognizing what you thought you knew, and then what there's yet to learn, and then applying it, and then sort of going back through what you thought you knew, and just you keep practicing and you keep seeing your faults, and you keep working on it. And I think mastering meaning I think perfection is by definition something you want to achieve,
mm-hmm.
but yeah, mastery I think is definitely achievable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've experienced the same kind of thing because one of the things that the Japanese consultants I worked with would say was, where are the QC circles? I think that was probably one of the early indicators that there was a fundamental people element of it that was missing. The sort of the conflicting nature of management versus labor unions was also an eye opener for a lot of the Japanese, and because a lot of the unions in Japan were either company unions or entered into negotiations in a very sort of a win-win proactive way, because they had years and years of growth, and because generally speaking, companies treated employees fairly well, and there was a different industrial history.
Mm-hmm.
So not only was the Japanese and American culture different, you had a different history of industrial relations between labor and management.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have that, and you try to bring in a respect for people in an environment where you don't even have basic trust, that's challenging.
Right.
You have to sort of start with, let's establish basic trust and respect, and not stab each other in the back, and not have systems, not allow systems that have been built up over decades to remain there, and then try to put lean on top of it. It's building your house on a foundation of sand. So I think that's where there's more you have to consider when you're doing lean than just these three pillars. Obviously, the legs of the stool, you've got to sit on a foundation, and the foundation is basic stability in lots of things, right? Lots of environmental, contextual things. If bombs are dropping on you, forget about lean. Get out from under the bombs. If your market is collapsing, you've got to figure out a way to not go out of business. If you're being raided for illegal activities, you need to take care of that before you embark on a lean journey. So all those kind of things come into play. But if you're in a kind of a stable, legal, moral, ethical, business market condition, and you can build on it, then you can ask the question of, okay, what does it mean? Is lean all about the people? Where does the people element play in? And I would say for implementing a lean system, it's only a meaningful question if it's fit in the context of what's the lean system we're trying to build. You're not trying to build a people system. You're not trying to build a system of engagement. You're not trying to build a high performance work team. You're not trying to build a system where employees are the best, most happiest, engaged, whatever. That's one of the factors and features. But what you're trying to build is flow more value through in a limited amount of time, and have a way to alert you and respond as quickly as you can see feedback. So whether it's the market isn't buying it, we need to reduce, or quality's bad, we need to address, or we launched a product, it needs, here's what we thought was a minimum viable product, but market's telling us something else. It's that response system. And how does the people element of it, I guess, or people factor of it, enable those two things? And then how do those two things enable people and build people?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, maybe instead of saying lean is all about the people, or making really strong statements like that, I think it's safe to say that people is an important part of lean. How's that?
Yeah, I think it's true, but that people don't say that because I think it's not a strong enough statement.
Yeah.
I think that's the interesting part, is, are we making this very strong statement because traditionally people have been
ignored,
seen as not important?
Yeah.
Or like you said, we've looked at tools and technologies and the engineering side of it, and not the people aspect of it. Therefore, we're sort of making a comeback and saying, no, it's all about the people. Don't forget. We're not saying don't forget. We're saying it's all about. It's the most important. So,
or the way that I would phrase it, it was like, the tools are obviously important, but it's all about the people. I think that's probably how many of us would phrase it. Like I do believe people sometimes go maybe a little bit overboard with it's all about the people. And I'm like, yeah, except for you don't know anything about, basic stuff like 5S, the 7 ways, values, any kind of tool. So I suppose maybe I don't want to be abrupt or unkind about it, but it's kind of like we could all stand in a circle and sing Kumbaya, but if we don't have any clue what to do after we're done singing, I don't know how much we're going to help each other, right?
Yeah. So. It's not an either or thing, and that's why the all about phrase is inherently inappropriate. Right?
Yeah.
I think if you liken it to team sports and you say, well, American football is all about the players. Obviously, it's the talent you have on the team. That's true, but it's also about the training and the scheme and the coaching and all these other things that happen on the field, and whether or not they have the right technique. And it's also about whether or not you have accountability and discipline, or you let people go out and get into fights and get drunk and not show up for practice. Abnormality management.
All right.
You can't have any one of those be substandard and survive.
Yeah.
But if you coach or manage a team with a inherent philosophy, or explicit philosophy, I should say, that says it's all about the players, or it's all about, I think rarely people are going to say it's all about the scheme and the system in a player sports environment, because players do have an outsized impact, but just as much of it is about the accountability, discipline, the abnormality management part of it.
Yeah.
And even among, when the coaches realize, hey, this this season isn't going the way we want, or this quarter isn't going the way we want, or the guys aren't executing. They're not staying. They're not filling their gaps. They're running after the ball instead of being where they should be. Those kinds of things are, to take it in any kind of a context, I think you have to. It's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
If you look at lean as a system you're trying to implement to create value, I think you end up with the conclusion that it's not all about the people,
right.
Because it can't be all about one thing.
Yeah.
And it's about the system, but the people are necessary.
Yeah. Very necessary. Yeah.
Well, at least at the moment. I mean, at the moment it is. At some foreseeable future, AI could be asked to respond to detect and respond to abnormalities. Once the system is in place, could look at the data and adjust for lot sizes and flows, could look at market data and adjust Kanban and do the whole Heisenberg calculation. And they could even come up with improvement ideas based on deep learning. And they could even say, well, based on what you're telling me about, based on what you humans have input to me about what value is, what you want as a level of profit, a level of social equity, a level of, environmental degradation, a level of all these things. Here's how I'm going to decide what to build, how to build it, and how to price it. I mean, these are questions that we humans answer imperfectly, and maybe AI could answer them as well or better. So you could say, maybe it's not about people. I mean, it's all for the people. Obviously, we build it for us. But you could get to a system where we get to a lean system foreseeably, maybe not in 10 years, but you could imagine this where humans were 10, 20% of the equation rather than right now, which it could be 30 to 60% of the equation.
Or what happens if Elon Musk becomes president of the United States and then just robots running around everywhere or something? I don't know, right? Sort of a joke, but not really. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think I wouldn't worry about. I wouldn't worry about that. You got other things distracting them. So
yeah, good stuff. All right, Jon. Well, man, it's always good to have you on, and I was really fascinated by the blog article series, and I wanted to obviously want people to read the blog article. So again, gembapodcast.com. This is episode 207. So we'll link to those two articles. So go give them a read and let us know what you think and leave a comment or whatever it is. But Jon, any final thoughts or parting words that you want to leave with folks?
Yeah, I want to end on a positive. I mean, it's not about Elon Musk and robot flamethrower AI apocalypse. It's about thinking about this question of is it all about the people element of the work we do? Being more aware of it, rather than just accepting it at face value because it sounds right, which I think a lot of us do. And like you said, if you come from a background of more of a technical Lean Six Sigma background, and now you're becoming more aware of the importance of the people aspect of it, don't just take that at face value and take it for granted, but really question it, really think about what does it mean. Mm-hmm. And if the answer is that you don't think it's all about the people, it's only 30 or 50 or 70%, that's fine, as long as you've thought about it, and as long as you can keep thinking about it and come up with good answers and explain it and be willing to change your mind, rather than accepting it as dogma, because I think it's become dogma that Lean's all about the people, but it's almost an empty statement. Mm-hmm. And that's dangerous, because in 10 years, people could say, well, 10 years ago, we thought Lean was all about the people. Then we learned it's all about something else. And you'll still be wrong.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Hey, Jon, how can people connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me through the Gemba website. I don't know. Yeah.
All right. Email Ron and I'll get you to Jon. Ron@gembaacademy.com. How's that?
If you like.
Yeah. No, it's all good. It's all good. All right, Jon. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. And I do know one thing for sure, since you've quit all that crazy traveling, 50 weeks a year. I know one thing that you've gotten a lot better at, and it's talking American football.
Oh yeah.
much better at that. Yep. So yeah, good stuff. All right, Jon. Well, hey, I'm sure we'll talk again soon, and thanks for coming on.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Gemba Academy podcast. Now, we invite you to take a no strings attached, fully functional test drive of GembaAcademy.com. Gain immediate access to more than 1,000 Lean and Six Sigma learning resources, all free of charge at GembaAcademy.com.